Wake up with the morning light, mountain air, a chilling bite. Got my pack, I'm good to go.
We continue the exciting true life Alaskan adventure story of Norman and Sylvia Wilkins. If you missed any earlier episodes, please be sure to go back and enjoy them. The Alaska Diaries, 10,000 Days, Episode 6. Winter Camping Snow Cave and Nelchina Glacier Gold Rush. Part 1, February 1980. February settled in without ceremony. There was no single storm or moment that marked its arrival, just a steady accumulation of work, cold, and responsibility that pressed in day after day. The kind of month where you measure time not by dates, but by how many loads of wood you have left to haul before dark. My birthday came and went on the 1st. I spent it much the same as any other day, hauling wood, cutting, splitting, stacking. Henry needed help around the lodge, and there was always something waiting to be done. By evening, my back had that familiar dull ache that comes from honest work in cold air. It was not unpleasant. Just a reminder. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Wood for the lodge, wood for the shop, wood for cabins. Repairing chains, clearing snow, keeping paths open. After a heavy snowfall, I climbed up and cleared the cabin roof, then shoveled out the woodpile and cut fresh trails through 16 or more inches of new snow. The kind that falls thick and quiet, then settles in as if it intends to stay. Going to be a long cleanup, Henry said, looking out over it. It already is, I told him, and he smiled at that. There were small interruptions to the routine, the kind that stand out because they are rare. Leo Ogilsky stopped by one afternoon, drawn more by the promise of coffee than anything else. He sat with his hands wrapped around the cup like it was something precious. Don't get much of this anymore, he said. Well, you do today, I told him, and poured him another before he could ask. Moments like that carried weight in a place where most things were earned the hard way. The weather shifted often that month. One night, it would warm enough to bring wet snow and wind. The next, it would settle back into a steady cold. I put up markers along the lodge driveway, so folks wouldn't drift off the edge and get stuck. Fixed chains where I could. Try to stay ahead of the small problems before they became larger ones. There were days when the work slowed just enough to notice the quiet. Moose moved through the woodlot, using the trails I had packed down. They walked them like they belonged there, and in a way they did. By mid-month, the temperature climbed in a way that felt almost suspicious. 51 degrees one day, sun shining like it had forgotten where it was. I took advantage of it and changed the oil in the truck. Days like that don't last long, and you learn not to waste them. Not everything was work. Lee and I made our way back to Sam's cabin along the Nelchina River one afternoon. It was a good stretch on snowshoes, and the visit was worth it. A young fellow named Tommy was there. He walked 40 miles in from where his parents lived out in the bush. He was young, but he carried himself like someone who already understood the country. You came all that way alone? I asked him. He nodded. Didn't see much reason not to. There wasn't much more to say after that. Sam sent me back with a few books, and we sat for a while talking before heading out again. It was a good afternoon. The kind you remember later without needing to explain why. Part 2, The Northern Lights. A few days after that, I trekked into Peter's cabin on Mindeltna Creek and stayed the night. His place was small, but tight and well-built. The kind of cabin that holds heat and keeps the cold where it belongs, outside. That night, the Northern Lights came alive in a way that stopped conversation altogether. Green and white ribbons moving slow across the sky, shifting and folding like something breathing. Peter stepped outside with me and looked up. Doesn't get much better than that, he said. No, I said. It doesn't. We stood there a while without talking. There are things you don't need to put into words. Back at the lodge, the routine picked up again. Wood, chores, small repairs. I tried calling Sylvia one evening, but she wasn't home. The line rang out, and I let it go. Later, I got hold of Bob, then went back to work with Henry hauling more wood. The days moved steadily towards something without announcing what it was. On the 18th, Jim, Mike Lee, and I went out cross-country skiing near Eureka. They were all experienced. I was not. I did my best to keep up, but those skis had a mind of their own. At one point, I found myself coming down a hill faster than I liked, with a spruce tree waiting at the bottom. Well, I said to myself, This is going to end one way or another. I sat down hard in the snow to stop myself, then got up and walked around the tree. When I caught up, the others were laughing. You planning to ski or just ride it out? Mike called back. I'm learning, I told him. Just slower than the rest of you. But let me have that. Part 3. Winter camping in Snow Cave. By the 20th, we were making plans for something more deliberate. A cross-country trip out from Eureka. Skiing in, camping, staying a few days. The kind of trip that tests what you know and shows you what you don't. We spent the next day organizing gear, making sure we had what we needed and not much more. Out there, every pound matters. On the 22nd, we gathered at Nelchina Lodge and made our way to Eureka. It was cold, 20 below, and clear. The kind of cold that keeps everything sharp and honest. We started out mid-morning on skis. It didn't take long to realize mine weren't going to work with my boots. Jim looked back at me after a few miles. You're not going to make it like that. I was coming to the same conclusion, I said. He dug into his gear and handed me a pair of snowshoes. Use these. That made all the difference. We made our way out toward Albert Dome and started looking for a place to dig in. The drift we chose was deep enough, and we set to work with whatever we had, shovels, snowshoes, even a skillet at one point. I broke the handle off that skillet before long. Sylvia wasn't there to see it, but I made a note to remember to get her another one. It took most of the day to carve out the space. By the time we finished, we had a snow cave large enough to hold all of us, with a separate area set aside for cooking. We thinned part of the roof to let light filter through the snow, and the effect was something close to natural. Inside, the temperature held around 30 degrees once we got cooking, warm enough that you could feel your hands again. Dan blocked the entrance to keep the heat in. The floor dipped and rose in a way that trapped the warm air, and a higher shelf became a place for the dogs to sleep. They settled in without complaint, as if they understood the design better than we did. That night, we ate well. Don't hold back on the fat, Mike said as he worked the skillet. No one's going to argue with you, I told him. Out there, fat is heat. You don't waste it. We slept late the next morning, the kind of sleep that comes easy when you've worked for it. Breakfast was heavy: bacon, eggs, pancakes. Everyone wanted the bacon grease poured over the top, and no one thought twice about it. We spent part of the day exploring, though the fog made it uncertain. Dan and I stayed close at first. Not much to find your way back to if it closes in, he said. That cave disappears quick, I agreed. Jim and Mike went out farther on skis, trusting their trail to hold. When the fog lifted, we followed, making our way out toward Crooked Creek. It was good country, even in low visibility. On the way back, the weather turned again. A whiteout and a ground blizzard came in together, flattening everything into one color. For a while, there was nothing to see but the person ahead of you. Still, we found our way back. That night, the cave felt like something earned. By the 24th, none of us were in a hurry to leave. It was warm, quiet, and well-made. But we had told people we would be out, and that matters. We packed up and made our way back toward Eureka. The others moved ahead on skis, faster than I could go on snowshoes. Not far from the lodge, I stopped for a moment and looked off to the side. A small group of ptarmigan moved among the low spruce, blending in so well you could miss them entirely. Part 4. Gold Rush on Nelchina Glacier. By the time I reached the others, Patty Billman was already there, walking out to meet us. You boys picked a time to disappear, she said. Why is that? Dan asked. There's been a gold strike, she said. Nelchina Glacier. That was enough. Inside the lodge, the place was full. People talking over one another, trading information, trying to get ahead of something that had already begun moving. Where have you been? A man asked Dan. Out in the hills, Dan said. You should have been at the glacier. Dan grinned and slapped him lightly on the stomach. You couldn't go where we've been. The room shifted around that idea. Two kinds of value, not quite the same. The next morning, word came that the U.S. Geological Survey would announce the location. Plans formed quickly. Dan would fly us in on skis. We gathered what we needed: stakes, gear, enough to get started. By the 26th, Mike and I were on the ground, moving across the glacier on snowshoes. 13 miles of steady travel. By the time Dan flew in that evening, it was getting dark and the temperature had dropped again. He circled low and started dropping our gear. Moo, Mike shouted as the bags hit the snow and began to sink. We scrambled to pull them up before they disappeared completely. The starlight reflecting off the snow gave just enough visibility to find what we could. One bundle of stakes went missing, but we recovered most of it. That night, we dug another snow cave, smaller this time, just enough for two. Mike cooked supper, and we settled in. It was colder than the last cave, but it held. In the morning, Dan came back, and we set to work staking claims. 6 of them, 40 acres each. Measuring, marking, making it official. At one point, we heard the sound before we saw it. A helicopter coming in low. Then another. Looks like we're not the only ones, Mike said. National Geographic. NBC News. Cameras pointed down at us as we worked. Smile, I told him. He didn't. Later, we heard one helicopter had tried to land and punched through the crust, damaging a skid. Even the machines had trouble out there. Snow began to fall lightly, and the day started to close in. Dan got us out before dark, lifting off the glacier and heading back to the lodge. By the 28th, things had settled again. We dried out our gear, rested, and made plans to register the claims. Supper with Henry and Betty felt steady and familiar after everything. February had a way of doing that, holding you in one place long enough to understand it, then shifting just enough to remind you that nothing stays still. Out in the snow, you learn patience. You learn how to build something that holds heat, how to move carefully, how to pay attention. Gold is different. It moves fast. It stirs people up. It brings noise into quiet places. We had both in the same week. And in the end, it was hard to say which one taught more. This concludes episode 6. If you're enjoying the story and would like the books this story is based on, go to 10,000daysinalaska.com for more info. Episode 7 will air next Saturday at 7 a.m. Alaska time. And for all you Midwesterners watching and listening, that means 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time.